received the title covering the Danish parliament, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and after hearing Professor Peter Woodward, I have to switch to a different topic that could embolden what he has said. So allow me to do that as an improvisation rather than a written lecture. We have to understand that throughout history, all third parties that wanted to be honest brokers of peace have proved to be a dismal failure, because they never took the negotiating parties on both sides at even level, but rather top dog versus underdog, supported by a third party that pushes the top dog to make the underdog make concessions. So we never ever had any real negotiations between two parties that could be on parity level, but it was basically one dominant party against a weaker party. So we never had any conflict resolution, but we had conflict management. And there is a big difference between crisis management and conflict resolution. We have to go back to history and look at this conflict. It didn't start with October 7th, but it started 70 more years before, between two epistemic communities. One owned the land and one was transferred to Palestine as a result of Holocaust and what we call the pogroms in Russia and what have you. So the Europeans wanted to solve the Jewish issue in Europe by sending them and by making it very legal through the League of Nations, by Balfour Declaration, and the British, being the mandatory power in Palestine, facilitated the process of settlements, of Jewish settlements coming from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and from other parts of the world. Now, I cannot explain to you this horrific history of a people that is still struggling for a main concept that most nations have achieved, is the right to self-determination. Americans always preach us of democracy, and they preach us of Woodrow Wilson and his human rights articles. And in one of those articles, Article 16, which says that people have the right to self-determination. We are struggling for that right, ladies and gentlemen. In one of the longest occupation in modern history, we are still did not achieve our self-determination. We hear about human rights, we see champions of human rights, and one of them is Denmark, let alone Sweden, Norway, and since we are addressing the Nordic audience here, but beyond moral sympathy and empathy, we have never seen any concretized action of implementing those sloganeerings that really sound music to our ears. But we never had an action plan to see how that could be implemented for the Palestinians to become a sovereign nation. Ladies and gentlemen, we made our painful historic concession in 1988 when we have accepted the state of Israel as de jure recognition, while the Israelis only recognize that we are the indigenous people of this country called Palestine without any political references and what have you. Israel never made its historic concession. Israel uses all kinds of means to play an imperative role in trying to avoid the essence of this conflict, which is political sovereignty for the Palestinians. The Balfour Declaration was very clear. A national home for the Jews with respect to the civil and religious rights of the population, regardless, Palestinians, whoever was there. The word political rights was not mentioned in the Balfour Declaration, because if that was mentioned, then we should have, by now, a Palestinian state. Promises from the West have been hollow. And I have to be a little bit now daring to tell you, we don't need your charity. Palestinians don't need charity. Palestinians want their political rights. And once we have our political rights and sovereign state, we don't need the help of the West, neither of that of the Arab world. We have built the Arab world. We Palestinians are the highest intellectuals in the Middle East. And we have been producing in science, in every aspect of culture and what have you. So the question here is how long the West and the United States in particular is going to ignore the quest of freedom by the Palestinians. How long? It's been 70 years. And we have vowed to ourselves since the Nakba that we would never succumb and leave our country. With the devastation of this atrocious, heinous crimes committed against humanity, what we refer to not as a war, but as genocide. A war is between two equal potential forces fighting each other. That's not the case in Gaza, neither in the West Bank. It's a unilateral approach by Israel to totally eliminate the Palestinians through ethnic cleansing and through dismantling their villages and to occupy their lands and extend what they call settlements at the expense of the indigenous population. I must say, with all respect to the Indian Revolution that stood up to the Yankees, but we are not going to accept to be Red Indians in our country. We want to be sovereign and we want to achieve our political rights. As every single nation in the world, because we are not children of a lesser God, as we always say. We have equal rights, we have civil rights, and we have political rights. Today, the war between Palestine and Israel is turning to be a war of images, perceptions, cognitions, and that's how we pursue our struggle to get acknowledged and recognized as an independent Palestinian state. So such a conference is very, very crucial because it raises awareness about a different dimension of this conflict. Today, Christian Zionism, with all its substructures in the United States and all over Europe, they play a crucial role in the decision-making process. And that's why we have to act as lobbyists to counterattack the Christian Zionists that are using religion to justify the permanent occupation of Palestine under the rubric of biblical prophecy that this land was promised to the Jews, as if God is a real estate agent. So we cannot accept this narrative. This narrative is based on pure racism. And that's why I consider the Christian Zionists, being a Christian myself, Catholic, my arch enemy in the struggle of changing those perceptions that are promoting a racist apartheid state called Israel under the bastion of democracy. Israel is a theocratic state, ladies and gentlemen. Israel is not a secular democratic state. Please don't be fooled by the democracy for the settlers and for the extremists now in Israel. We lost the support of many leftist groups in Israel because the hegemony of the settlers and the far extreme right-wingers have dominated the scene in Israel for the last 14 years. When are we going to change our attitude in taking bold decisions? Not only slogans of a two-state solution, of human rights, no. Europe and the Americans, if they are really serious about the two-state solution, they should start putting now siege and embargo on a state that is considered to be a Satan state in the Middle East. And as you can see, the state is not only satisfied with the occupation of all historic Palestine. They are interested in Syria, they are interested in Jordan, they are interested in Egypt, they are interested in Iraq. So the conception of expansionism gives me all the vibrations of the resurgence of what we call a new Middle East imperialism championed by the State of Israel. How on earth you receive these warmongers in your parliaments, in your governments, in Europe, and that of the United States? Ladies and gentlemen, Professor said something about the number of evangelists, Christian Zionists. He said 100 million. You know 100 million in the United States have control of almost 25% of the electoral process, with the 2% of the Jewish minorities in the United States, they get 27, and usually the voting percentage is around 45. So what this means, that these Christian Zionists and the Jewish lobbyists that control almost the United States financially, academically, culturally, socially, of course on top of that Hollywood and what have you, could really appoint the President of the United States. And the United States President, only as a chief executive, does not extend more than 20% of his power. 80% goes to Congress, goes to lobbyists, goes to pressure groups, goes to all kinds, of interest groups that eventually make the policy. And ladies and gentlemen, the United States does not make the policies in the world. It's the multinational corporations, the Masonic movement, the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, the financial districts. These are the ones who control the economy of the world, and these are the ones who sell arms and push for regional conflicts in order to market their economy. And their economy is being supported by almost 60% of the military productions. So the United States does not thrive in selling American cars or microchips and what have you. They thrive, as per GDP, more than 65% from the selling of arms. So to sell arms, you have to create regional conflicts. Nobody can convince me that the Americans, whether Democrats or Republicans, are Tweedledum, Tweedledee. Because since the Truman administration in 1948, the American foreign policy in the Middle East was based on 4 determinants. 1, containing communism, and with the crumbling of the Soviet Union in 1988, they created an enemy, and that enemy is Islamic fundamentalism, because they cannot nurture as an imperialistic power without creating an enemy. And that's why we have Hamas, Daesh, and whatever. So these are the creations of the most contested liberal democracy in the world, i.e. the United States of America. I always say the democracy in the United States is the pinnacle of hypocrisy, because it's democracy for the few, for the elite who control the decision-making process. Secondly, and I will finish with the 4 determinants. Secondly, they have always had a policy to secure oil and natural gas from the Middle East at the prices that they set, not at the prices of the world index and what have you. Thirdly, unequivocal support of the state of Israel. It goes with a blind eye that this proxy regime is the regime that will implement all the national interests of the United States in the Middle East. And once Israel becomes a strategic liability, they will eliminate it like Hitler eliminated them. This is the mentality of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in America, because they are realizing what this country is going through by the Zionist lobbyists in Washington. And fourthly, curbing every single radical national liberation movement in the Middle East. So you go to history, and I recommend to you William Quant's book, and see for the last almost 70 years, did the United States policy in the Middle East change? No, and it will never change, because this is a strategic pillar for their own interest in the Middle East. One final word which I can say, we shall overcome, because history is going to be on our side. Now we are the subject of history and not the object of history. And with all the sacrifices of the Gazan people, we are going to achieve our independent state sooner or later. Thank you.